into our college breakdown. This is the last week of breakdowns in football season. So after this week, it's all talking about what has happened on the field. So get super pumped about that. And the last breakdown, as has been the case in every year we've been doing these, is the Big Ten East Division. Keith also has some stake in this, although he does not necessarily follow the team, being from Baltimore, the Maryland Terrapins. Obviously, Jim is the fanatic for a team from Ohio that has a Buckeye as a mascot. And I am a Penn State fan. So
I am the Ohio homer.
Also true. So last year's standings, Michigan 12-2, 8-1, wins the East Division. Ohio State 11-2, 8-1, finishes in second place. Michigan State 11-2, 7-2 in the Big Ten in third. Penn State 7-6, 4-5. Then Maryland 7-6, 3-6. Rutgers 5-8, 2-7, and Indiana brings up the rear 2-10 and 1-9.
Yeah, that happened last year. We're gonna forget about last year. New year.
Well, we'll forget about it after this. Fair?
That's fair.
The breakdowns again, thanks to College Football News, because there's a lot of copy and paste action in this one. We're gonna start as we have. We're gonna start at the top, work our way down to the bottom of the division.
Sure.
Michigan at the top beat Ohio State, obviously winning the Big Ten championship.
How many times are you going to say this? How many times are you going to make this a thing?
This is the first time I've said it.
But I'm asking, like, is this the last time, first and last? Or am I going to have to hear this?
I don't expect that I will talk about this again until that week for you.
Fair enough.
And then we'll just have to remind everybody, because you have to say it that week, right?
I agree.
What happened last year? Fair?
I understand. I just want to set the ground rules here. Like, let's move on.
Okay. As long as I get to set ground rules for Penn State as well.
I am not a guy who beats down on Ohio State versus Penn State. You know this.
No, I'm just saying generally about Penn State.
That's fine.
Okay. So again, they went to the college football playoff. That's really all that we should expect from Michigan. I mean, that's what they've been waiting for, and they finally broke through. It just did not seem possible for many years, obviously. Offensively,
fluke.
Michigan led the Big Ten in rushing. They led the Big Ten in fewest sacks allowed. They led the nation in fewest tackles for loss per game allowed. They were a balanced attack at 443 yards per game, didn't turn the ball over. So really, the
first time in a century.
The formula for success for all college teams and football teams to be successful was duplicated in Ann Arbor last year. Now they have to continue that with the new offensive coordinator. In fact, they have two new offensive minds in the coach room with Matt Weiss. And they who's that? Chiron Moore are the two people. So Weiss had some time with the Ravens, Keith, if you knew that name.
I did not.
Me either. And Chiron Moore spent the last few seasons with the tight ends. The situation for them isn't necessarily bad on the offensive side of the ball, but they still need to obviously keep up what they did last year with not turning the ball over much. The QB situation has been determined that Cade McNamara will start game 1, JJ McCarthy will start game 2, and then they're kind of going to figure it out from there. I don't recall there being a lot of success whenever this is how you start the season at quarterback. Ever.
Urban Meyer did that. Tressel did that. Neither one of those worked.
Yeah. The health of wide receiver Ronnie Bell, who missed most of last year with a knee injury, is a big deal on the offensive side of the ball, but he is expected to be back along with leading receiver Cornelius Johnson and pass-catching tight end Eric All. The offensive line should be okay, but they may need some time to work themselves in. They added Olusegun Owatimi from Virginia at center and settles the front five, which has all Big Ten guard Zach Zinter, along with tackle Ryan Hayes. 20 touchdown back Hassan Haskins has moved on, but Blake Corum is back after running for almost 1,000 yards and 11 scores last year. Jim, does Michigan offensively scare you as an Ohio State fan?
Okay. No more than Penn State does.
Fair enough. On the defensive side of the ball, new defensive coordinator Jesse Minters coming over from Vanderbilt, and he's a rising star who spent time with the Ravens. I'm seeing a trend here, Keith. What is
Yeah.
is there the Harbaugh connection? Is that what
It's
this
the
Yeah.
is?
Harbaugh connection.
Brother
There
vets the
are
thing and sends him his way.
it's back and forth. The two of them are probably scheming underneath their bed sheets, talking on the phone secretly, and
I love
conniving how to run the NFL and pipeline Michigan to NFL. It's a whole Ponzi scheme.
It's a Ponzi. That's
Sounds good to me. That's a good way to put it.
harsh words. I'm not even going to move on. I'll move on then. Even with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, the overall pass rush was just okay last year. Those two were obviously the headliners. They accounted for 25 of the team's 34 sacks. It's going to obviously be difficult to replace them and their production, but they're going to try to start with N. Taylor Upshaw, who is the leading returning sacker last year with 2.5. So a lot to replace on that line as far as the sack production. The interior is an area that should more seamlessly transition with 326-pound All-Star Mozzie Smith and 275-pound junior Chris Jenkins. So that should be a solid piece to the defensive line. Several of the top tacklers are gone, but Junior Colson is in the middle at one linebacker spot after finishing 4th on the team with 61 tackles last year. And Nakai Hill Green will work on the outside, coming off a 50 tackle season. The secondary also missing some big parts from last year, but within the Big Ten, they should be okay. Plenty of options with all Big Ten caliber defensive back DJ Turner and veteran safety RJ Moten. Final thoughts on Michigan, Jim?
They're going to be a good team.
Be a good team. Did not expect that.
I don't think they're going to be a great team like they were last year, but they're going to be a good team.
Okay. And that brings us to Jim.
The Ohio State Buckeyes. At Ohio State, we have C.J. Stroud, who is the lock at QB and a Heisman hopeful. Running back Trayvon Henderson is also a Heisman hopeful, but Mayan Williams will probably be also helping carry the load. At wide receiver is again the embarrassment of riches with Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, Emeka Igbuka, Jaden Ballard. Jaden Ballard is probably, coming up in the ranks. But the list goes on thanks to the recruiting of Brian Hartline. They are stacked deep at wide receiver. Tight end will be Cade Stover and Mitch Rossi. The O-line is stout, bringing in a lot of returners, but also filling it behind with some 4-star, 5-star recruits to cycle in and out. The offense is a machine. There's no worry on offense. Defensively, big questions. The big question since they took over is the defense. On offensive line, line coach Larry Johnson has Jack Sawyer, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Tyler Friday. The offensive line should be firing on our defensive line should be firing on all cylinders. Behind them is the question. Coach Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State has a whole new scheme. He's got Steel Chambers at linebacker, but he's the only one real name that the casual fan will remember. Not to say they haven't loaded up in that position, but it's definitely an area that the historic Ohio State fan is very much keen to be watching. Same goes for the secondary. Got Denzel Burke and Jalen Brown are the only two returning cornerbacks. Ronnie Hickman, Josh Proctor, and Tanner McAllister are the safeties. None of those secondaries are breakout performers like it used to be. So it's a big question. I mean, they got burnt deep a lot. So will Jim Knowles and his new scheme and a new defense be the answer for Ohio State?
So is the key word for defense or the word to describe them unproven at this point?
Very much so. Very much so.
Aside from defensive line, because you pilfered Larry Sanders from Larry Johnson from Penn State.
Yes. And that's that's been that way since, the first Bosa. But the problem, and it's always been the problem, and we'll go through this whole rigmarole of vetting the other teams. The only two tests that Ohio State will run up against to test the secondary, Michigan and Penn State. and then we'll run up. If we beat them, we will run up against whoever the other side is. Probably Wisconsin at this point, who probably still won't test that secondary.
Right.
And then you run into an SEC team who sure as shit will test that secondary.
Yeah.
So they got to get their shit together. That's Ohio State.
That's Ohio State. Moving on to another team from Michigan, but the state school variety. Michigan State was 11-2 in Mel Tucker's second season with the program, beat Michigan for the second year in a row, beat Penn State, went on to beat Pitt in the Peach Bowl. On offense, Michigan State, the running game now is minus Kenneth Walker. He obviously got all of the attention last year. They had a decent passing attack that kind of just blended well with the running attack, which has been a Michigan State staple. Somewhat like Wisconsin, aside from Michigan State can usually throw the ball better. The offense didn't control the clock, again, but that's considering that Walker was just running all over many teams and had to press a little too often because the defense struggled badly. But everything was fine on offense, able to get around 400 yards a game. When it stalled, which did happen, and that was when the ground game was neutralized, there were issues. The Spartans did go out and get themselves a couple new backs. Some are saying terrific to replace Walker. Jarek Broussard was in Colorado in 2020 and did what he could there last year in a bad situation. Jalen Berger was a former super recruit for Wisconsin who just did not work out. So they have talent. It's just will the talent translate on the field into production? There is some working to be done with a few key lost starters on the offensive line. And obviously with that, you obviously also have depth problems. They did get guard Brian Green from Washington State. And on the left side of the line, they should be fine with tackles Jarrett Horst and guard J.D. Duplain, who are two returners. Peyton Thorne was under the radar, even with over 3,000 yards passing and almost 30 touchdowns last year, because Walker was the star of the show. But when the offense didn't have Walker in the backfield for the bowl game, Thorne did show that he can come up in the clutch, throwing for 54 yards and 3 scores in their bowl game. Again, this is probably going to be a year where he has to do more. The running backs should still be the stars of the Michigan State offense, but Jaden Reed might be the second best receiver in the Big Ten behind Ohio State's Jackson Smith and Jigba. He hit the 1,000-yard mark last year with 10 scores, averaging over 17 yards a catch. Trey Mosley should be a reliable number 2 for the Spartans, and Illinois transfer Daniel Barker is a all Big Ten caliber tight end. Again, for Michigan State on offense is, can they reproduce the production that they lost with Kenneth Walker, an NFL player now? On the defensive side of the ball, this was a problem last year. They weren't able to stop anybody from throwing the ball. They brought defensive coach Scotty Hazelton in. He's been around in the defensive assistant block with Michigan State, and there is some talent on the D, but again, does that translate to production on the field? They should not be the worst pass defense in America again, you would hope, but you will never know. The run defense was fine, but that's because everyone could throw the ball all over the field against Michigan State last year. They gave up too many first downs, penalties, blah, blah, blah. The defense sucked. I don't think we can get anywhere past that. So I'm not going to talk anymore about the defense, aside from they need to step it up if they want to be competitive this year in the Big Ten East Division. Other thoughts on Michigan State?
I think the big thing is that coach can fire up a team pretty hard. They are good. They have the talent. They can catch a team. But if you start hammering on them hard, you can beat them down and it's over. They get fired up real easy. I think they can catch a Michigan because of the rivalry. They could catch an Ohio State because if they go up, they're up. But if you smack the shit out of them real quick, they don't come back very easy. So, and they're down these weapons, and it's going to be hard this year, I think. That's my opinion.
Keith, any thoughts?
Without their defense, they belong in the Big 12.
There you go.
If they recreate last year, yes, they would be a Big 12 team. Aside from they run the ball, so it'd be like the Iowa State version, right?
Yes.
Next, we get to the Nittany Lions of Penn State. This year is all about Penn State getting its groove back. Obviously, James Franklin has been successful in the regular season, has not necessarily been able to win the big games overall. So they did have the one season whenever they should have went to the national championship game or at least the playoff. But alas, Ohio State got the nod. So they know success. It's just going to be, can they translate that this year after a rough 2021 campaign? Offensively last year, and hopefully not the theme this year, the offense did not do enough. It was mediocre from the standards that many would expect given who was there. And they weren't able to hit a lot of downfield plays to anybody aside from Jahan Dotson. He is now in the NFL, so they've got to reload there. So James Franklin, as has been the case, is able to bring in good recruiting classes to typically top 10 recruiting classes in the country, but those have not always translated to the field at all positions. The offensive line will be the big question mark. They need to be better. The running game was pedestrian at best at times last year, and they're hoping that some of their transfer portal gets Hunter Norzad from Cornell and JB Nelson from a junior college are able to bolster the offensive line for them to be better. Second leading rusher and former star, when I say star, former star at Penn State, Noah Cain has left to LSU. Kevon Lee is the man as far as the returners. They did bring in Nick Singleton as a recruit, who will also get time in. The Lawn Boys, as they've been come to be known as with Penn State, they've typically had 2 to 3 solid backs, and Penn State fans are hoping that will continue. Back for his who knows how many seasons, he's starting to become the Taylor Martinez of Penn State. Sean Clifford is back, threw over 3,000 yards last year. Obviously had some injuries towards the end of the season, which did not help, especially his mobility. He's good. He's not great. So he has to do everything in his power to limit turnovers and just be able to move the chains and get Penn State on the board. Again, Jahan Dotson was the main person at receiver, and they got to figure out how to make that work. Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith are back, so they will try to fill that void. And they brought in a transfer, Michael Tinsley from Western Kentucky, who obviously was an air raid offense last year. So they're hoping that that will help. As far as tight end, which has been the consistent stars on the offense, with Pat Fryermuth, you had others coming in the past, but this year it's Brenton Strange and Theo Johnson who should be the main tight end pass catching options. On defense, this was a bend not break situation last year. The only allowed more than 24 points twice, which goes back to the offensive issues that didn't allow them to break through last year, losing a lot of closer games. So when you give up no more than 24 points twice in a season in the Big Ten as Penn State, you should have a better record than they did. But when the defense allowed 20 points or fewer, Penn State was 7-1. So that was that magic mark, is allow 20 points or fewer, and hopefully they continue to do well on the defensive side of the ball. They losing Arnold Ebiketie, who's in the NFL now. So they're hoping that they'll be able to reload there. The defensive line has typically been a strength over the past few years for Penn State. They've been able to translate talent to the field and to the NFL, but it is linebacker U, and that's where everyone will be looking. So they're hoping the linebacking core will be able to reload, because they did lose their top tacklers in Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith, and it's going to be a hope that Curtis Jacobs is the one that comes out as the next linebacker at Penn State. The secondary should be a bright point overall. They have Joey Porter, who's a projected NFL draft pick at this point, and their leading tackler last year in Jair Brown. So the hope is that the Penn State defense will still be good and the offense will be able to catch up.
You good?
Huh?
Are you good? You got that done?
It's done, Jim.
James Franklin sucks. He's horrible. He's shit. You need a new coach. You're never going to recruit the big dogs with James Franklin. You're never going to win the big one with James Franklin. Get a new coach.
Get a new defense, Jim. Get a new defense.
Well, at least we try. We fire coaches and we get Jim.
Are you trying? We'll find out this year.
Muff, we replace coaches. People suck. We make moves. James Franklin has been there and nothing has changed.
Just go down to the chop house, find yourself a new coach, Jim.
Get a new coach, man. Keith, step in here. What do you think about Penn State?
I think they're currently playing the safe bet. As far as coaching goes, I tend to agree with Jim a little bit. As far as recruiting, you need, I think, some fresh blood. Get some more talent in there. However, point of contention, actually, this is kind of interesting.
Point of contention.
I love this.
So it's actually sort of a little personal story. Apparently, I am somehow related very, very distantly to Troy Reeder, who was a linebacker for Penn State. He now plays for the Rams, I believe. So small world. No idea. I've met him. Never.
What's that to do with James Franklin, Keith?
What was
Keith bleeds blue and white. Didn't you hear that?
that?
Do you like James Franklin?
That's
Keith?
what I just heard.
I don't dislike him. There's
Oh,
nothing to
Keith.
dislike about him.
He's trash.
Speaking of trash, moving on to a team that's named after turtles, the Maryland Terrapins from the great state of Maryland, Keith.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you to go through this because you were very honest in saying I don't keep up with Maryland football.
And there's a reason for that, because over my 15 years of just casually observing from the sidelines, they've been the same team forever and ever and ever. They will always beat the teams they're supposed to beat, and they will always lose to the teams they are supposed to lose to. I mean, when you look at the rest of their conference, you're going up against schools that have almost 100,000 students enrolled at Penn State. You've got 50,000 at Michigan. I'm pretty sure there's a direct correlation between the number of kids you have in enrolled institution and the quality sometimes that comes with it. So they just fight an uphill battle every year. And they finally won last year. They had a winning season, but it was a struggle to say the least.
So did you just call all the other successful teams the Big Ten dum-dums?
No. Where did that come from?
Sounded like there's a prestige to Maryland.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I'm just saying they have maybe 40,000 people at their school, and they don't have, I don't know. Maybe they need a new coach as well, too. Get some better recruiting going on.
You need to stop touching that terrapin statue before the game. I think that's the thing. I think they're whatever diseases you can get from turtles, obviously they're catching.
Hey, lay off the mascot, buddy.
It's a turtle, Keith. It's a turtle. It's better than a nut, I guess. At least snapping turtles have some redeeming value as a predator.
Turtles can't tear their ACLs either.
They don't have any.
We'll get into that later.
Later, I think now's the time, isn't it?
Oh no, with the NFL talk with Poe.
Oh, okay. I think that was a good breakdown, Keith. We're going to leave it there. Moving on to the team that Jim likes to think is Penn State's rival, Rutgers.
They are the rival. Just ask them.
Stats Rutgers. I agree. So Rutgers has been successful as far as getting to bowl games and winning them. They're not necessarily a contender for a national championship anytime soon, and they may not play for a Big Ten title, but they're at least not the worst team in the Big Ten anymore. The offense just needs to be better. It was the worst in the Big Ten on third downs. It was inefficient, and overall the running game was hit or miss. But they did do well when the running game was on point. Greg Schiano is the head coach, says this year is all about being physical. They want to be a tough team on defense. They want to be a ground and pound team on offense. So that's the hope. They're going back to the basics. I guess they're trying to be like Nebraska a la Tom Osborne days. Leading rusher from last year, Isaiah Pacheco, is gone. And unfortunately, the person who's next person up only had 235 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. And the next person after that only had 205 yards. So could be an issue unless one of those guys step up. But they do have Noah Vedral at quarterback. He was the team's second leading rusher. So there's where the production may be able to be picked up a little bit. But it's going to be up to him to hit the easy throws and to keep the offense matriculating down the field. The receiving core didn't really get anything in the offseason, so I would imagine that Rutgers will be struggling throwing the ball and hope that the ground game can move them down the field. Defensively, they have to be better, but they're also playing against teams that are probably outmatching them on every position. So they got to figure out a way to come up with takeaways, which is a Shiano team staple. But there will be new coaches on the defensive side of the ball, which could create some issues early on. The defense allowed close to 400 yards a game and was worst in the Big Ten in pass efficiency defense. So not only were teams moving the ball, but they're also moving the ball through the air, which does typically translate to more points on the field. The corners, again, have to step it up, and they need to have more pressure from the defensive front. So everything that typically leads to positive defensive outcomes is what Rutgers needs to improve upon. Jim, any thoughts on Rutgers?
I think they're a team that will catch people. They're going to have more wins than most people anticipate, but they're still not a very good team.
Okay. Keith, do you have any thoughts on Rutgers?
No, I agree with Jim.
Okay. Indiana bringing up the rear here. Just when it seemed that India fans, things couldn't get worse for them, it got worse. They were last in the Big Ten East Division. Some say that the record of 2-10 was not as bad as it seemed. I don't know how that goes, but I mean, they played in some games where they were close enough, and they almost beat Cincinnati last year. Offensively, they need to find a way to put points on the board. They had the worst offense in the Big Ten last year, averaging less than 300 yards per game overall. They turned the ball over. They couldn't run the ball. As you would expect a 2-10 team to do, they did not do the things that you need to do in offense to put points on the board. Head coach Tom Allen is going to take a more active role in the offensive side of the ball, and they brought in some additional pieces through the transfer portal to help out. Last year, Michael Penix, who was supposed to be the person who led Indiana to mediocrity, at least in the Big Ten, did get hurt, and that was an issue. So they had to shop people around. Penix is now no longer with the program, going to Washington. So they welcomed in former Missouri starter Connor Bazelak to compete with Jack Tuttle and Donovan McCulley for the job, which right now Tuttle appears to have. But again, there may be a lot of unproven situations there, and things could change throughout the year. As far as receiving, they have people coming back. They brought some people in. They're going to have to just figure it out. The running game, again, you would expect getting an overhaul because they sucked. Up front, it's not a total rehaul, not a total retooling. But again, for a team that did not do well offensively, you know that they're going to try to fix the pieces in there. Defensively, all that was just said about the offense, defense was worse. They pretty much need to start back from scratch and figure it out. I would go through and give you all the names, but nobody cares about that. So we are going to get to our predictions for the Big Ten East Division. Keith is a little behind on this, so we don't expect much from Keith, but we'll allow Keith to comment on Jim and I's predictions. Sound like a good plan?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So, Jim, you want to tit for tat go from the bottom of the division to the top? You say your last, and then I'll say my last.
Yes, and I will say, will West Virginia beat each one of mine that I say?
Okay.
Rutgers, I believe West Virginia can beat Rutgers, and they will go 4-8.
Okay.
Your turn, Mo.
The bottom of the division, I have Indiana, and I am just doing Big Ten record. Indiana will be 1-8.
Indiana, 5-7. I believe West Virginia could beat Indiana.
In sixth place, I have Rutgers at 2-7 in the division, or in the Big Ten.
Next, I have Maryland at 6-6. I believe West Virginia could beat Maryland.
Okay. I have Maryland next as well at 4-5 in Big Ten play.
Then I have Michigan State at 7-5. They could not be West Virginia could not beat Michigan State.
I also have Michigan State at 6-3 in Big Ten.
I would tend to agree. West Virginia would have a very, very difficult time beating the next few teams coming up on the list.
I then have Michigan at 10-2. Their loss would be Ohio State and Penn State, and they also would beat West Virginia.
I, in third place in the Big Ten East, have Penn State at 6-3.
I have Penn State with their only loss. They're 10-2 with their only loss in the Big Ten would be Ohio State.
I'm assuming the other's Auburn.
Yes.
In second place, I have Michigan at 7-2.
And then Ohio State obviously would be the dog piss out of West Virginia and going 12-0.
And I have Ohio State at the top as well, going undefeated in Big Ten play at 9-0.
So, Chris, I'm curious, with your third place Penn State team at 6-3, are you just sort of sandbagging in hopes to say, oh, look, they outperformed what I was expecting and maybe throw it back in Jim's face a little bit? Or is this
I can only truly throw this back in Jim's face if Penn State beats Ohio State. So, yes, if Penn State beats Ohio State, I will throw everything back in Jim's face just because the head-to-head matchup. But I think that Michigan is building a program and will be able to this year and maybe next year. And I'm hoping Penn State will start to rebuild in a way that makes them competitive every year with Ohio State and Michigan.
They have to fire James Franklin if you want that to happen.
I mean, when's the last time Ohio State won a championship?
They've won more than Penn State.
When's the last time? Sounds like Ryan Day needs to go.
What, Big Ten championship?
No. The national
Because they've won more than Penn State of those, that's for sure.
national championship, Jim.
Oh,
Because I thought that's what Ohio State was always playing for.
they are. How many of those have they had a shot at that Penn State hasn't?
I go back to the year that Penn State should have been at least in the playoff.
Woulda, shoulda, coulda, but weren't.
Well, Ohio State woulda, shoulda, coulda won a national championship in the past few years, and they haven't.